Welcome, everyone. I am Beth Keene, CEO of Holocaust Museum LA, the first survivor-founded and oldest Holocaust museum in the country. Thank you for joining us for today's program, Escape, One Day We Had to Run, with authors Ming Wah and illustrator Carmen Vela. We are thrilled and honored that they have chosen to celebrate the worldwide launch of their new book today with Holocaust Museum LA. And on a more personal note, it is a privilege for me to host this program today with my very dear friends, Ming Wah, two brilliant, inspiring, fun, creative, driven, impressive women who manage to write children's books while they also have a full-time high-powered jobs. I know their friends and colleagues are with us today from many different time zones around the globe. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Holocaust Museum LA, I'll share a brief overview. In 1961, a group of survivors met at Hollywood High School while taking an English class, and they realized that they each had a photograph, document, or precious belonging from before, during, or after the Holocaust, and they wanted to create a safe space to display their precious artifacts in perpetuity and to remember their loved ones who had perished. They also wanted to start educating young people about the Holocaust and what they had endured. Today, the museum continues to provide free Holocaust education and the tools necessary to fight against anti-Semitism, hatred, and bigotry to tens of thousands of students from across California, the United States, and the world. Our permanent home, which was designed by acclaimed architect Hagi Belsberg, opened in 2010 in Pan Pacific Park on the Grove Drive, and we will be reopening on July 1st after being closed since March of 2020. Escape, One Day We Had to Run, is a beautifully illustrated children's book for ages 7 to 11, inspired by the ordinary people who throughout history have been forced to leave their families and homes because of war, famine, slavery, intolerance, economic and political upheaval, or climate change. The book is published by Lantana Publishing. Lantana is an award-winning children's book publisher and social enterprise with a mission to publish inclusive books by underrepresented voices, celebrating every kind of child and family. Lerner Publishing is the United States distributor for Lantana. Both houses publish exceptional books for children. Carmen Vela is an independent art director, designer, and illustrator from Spain. For over a decade, she has been living between Hong Kong, Brooklyn, and Europe, fueled by her love of books, paper, and stories. Ming Wah Chen are identical twins who love history, plucky heroes, and anything by Agatha Christie. Graduates of Harvard and Columbia Universities, respectively, they have previously published 2 children's books and live in Hong Kong and Los Angeles. Today, Ming Wah and Carmen will share some of the remarkable true stories of escape behind the book, as well as a peek behind the scenes of the creative process. And we'll have some time at the end of the program for questions. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And please look for the links to buy their book in the chat box. It is now my pleasure to introduce authors Ming Wah and illustrator Carmen. I will hand it over to you, Wah.
Thank you, Beth. Not only are you an amazing civic leader, but you're the best girlfriend Ming and I could ask for. Thank you so much for having us today. For those of you who are confused, who is Ming and who is Wah? I, Wah, am wearing orange. Ming is wearing pink. Okay, we recognize many family members and friends who are on this call. We see people from Amsterdam, Atherton, Atlanta, Austria, Basking Ridge, Shanghai, London, Vancouver, Chicago, Tucson, Brookline, Wayland, Massachusetts, Brooklyn, New York, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Summit, New Jersey, and Singapore. Thank you for staying up to watch this. We're sitting here in Millburn, our childhood home in New Jersey, with our parents, Tom and Margaret Chen, and both of them send each of you their very best.
We also see Carmen's family in Spain. Hola!
For many of you who do not yet have our picture book, which is available today in the United States and Canada, we wanted to show you our book template. There are 12, the book starts off with 12 verbs, next slide, highlighting a historic episode of escape with different people who had to flee their homes. They each have names and they each have individual stories of escape. The number one question that we get is, how did we come up with the idea for this book? Next slide. The original idea began with the verb swim. Our Cantonese nanny, Apinjia, literally swam, like many others, in the 1960s from the southern tip of China to the then British colony of Hong Kong. The shortest distance between southern China and Hong Kong is approximately 2.4 miles. We were always fascinated by her story, and we wanted to do a picture book about her journey. Next slide. I mean, look at her. She was a strong, healthy, hardworking second mother to us, who used to carry us around. Next slide. She used to carry Wah and us around, next one, like 2 hot water bottles. We were sitting at lunch with the publisher of a previous book and quickly pitched her the idea, which on our walk home cascaded from just swim into a volley of other action verbs, like raft, Cuba to Florida, like tunnel, East Germany to West Germany, and cling, our story about the Syrian sisters who helped guide their boat from Syria to Turkey to Greece. We found these stories through a combination of history books, biographies, autobiographies, and even YouTube. Here, we want to acknowledge the contributions of our invisible hands. First and foremost, Suki Garcetti, next slide. Suki is the mom of the mayor of LA, our copy editor, our creative consigliere. Suki, please take a virtual bow. Thank you, Suki. We are really grateful to have you in our lives. Next is, we want to say thank you to Catherine Sestano, who's also our pro bono partner and editor extraordinaire. Catherine, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We drew real life inspiration from people we know, not only our Apinjia, but also my colleague, Laura Alvarez. My 14-year-old daughter, a 9th grader at the Marlborough School, will now read her story.
Start. Will they see me? Will they hear me? Will I make it? 21-year-old Laura Alvarez huddled near the US-Mexico border, evading the United States Border Patrol. She had given her life savings to a coyote, a smuggler, to help her leave her small town in Mexico where violent gangs dominated daily life and jobs were scarce. Believing in the promise of a better life on the other side of the border, she left her family behind and crossed mountains and a highway by foot. Hundreds of thousands of immigrants from Mexico and Central America have risked their lives crossing into New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, or California. Laura made it to Los Angeles, where she was able to work hard as a property manager and raise 2 fine sons.
Thank you, Mai. Next slide. This is Laura Alvarez with her 2 sons, Christopher and Jordan. Thank you, Laura, for being part of this story. Laura's journey is topical now as the US border is flooded with an unprecedented number of migrants, including unaccompanied children, escaping poverty, gang violence, and natural disasters from Central America through Mexico. We wanted our book to humanize the people who flee and depoliticize migration. Our book shows that this has literally happened over hundreds of years in multiple countries. Next, we want to call out Beth Keene's husband, John Keene, who's a talented filmmaker and storyteller who suggested the story Petal to us. Next slide. Next slide. Petal is a story of Margaret, a real life story of Margaret, next slide, of Margaret and Hans Ries, who created Curious George. Carmen and I used to work at, Carmen was my former colleague at EF Education First, where I work, and Carmen's going to take us through her creative process. Over to you, Carmen.
Hi, thank you, Ming Wah. Carmen Vela here, connecting from Sevilla, South Spain. And I'm the illustrator of Escape, and I'm especially excited to share with you all today as it is my first picture book. and it's always a challenging and exciting task for an artist. I will introduce you briefly to my creative process behind the illustrations with 2 examples of the stories. So the first one being Pedal, the one that we are seeing in the screen. And I wanted to share that the overall visual intention in Escape is to depict 12 completely different universes and atmospheres. So each spread has its own color palette, its own graphic texture. In my mind, each one will feel like a different world when you open it. Escape is a picture book with 12 stories based on true events. Next slide. That's why the initial research about the stories was crucial. Can we see the next slide? Yes. So here we can see the research behind that spread, some of the key images and elements that actually were crucial at the time of illustrating that story. Hans and Margaret Ray, who fled from Paris right before the Nazi invasion in the city, and they traveled around the world to eventually arrive to New York and became well-known published authors themselves. And these are some of the images that I was looking at before illustrating. And next slide. As I was receiving the drafts from Ming and Wah for each of the stories, I will start looking at the images and start a process that will jump from analog, that will mean my pen and paper and pencil and crayons or collage, that will jump to digital compositions in my tablet or in my computer. Eventually, all these textures and small drawings will come together in the spread. In the next slide, yeah, you can see there some of the sketches behind and the final spread, a portion. Next slide. And this one is about Defy, which is another story in the book. This story is about Feng Shanho, whose action was to actually defy from a desk. The Chinese diplomat disobeyed authorities and risked his life from his own desk. He was not initially at risk or in danger himself until he made the moral choice to stand up against authorities, knowing he could be killed for it. He managed to issue more than 4,000 visas, helping Jewish people to flee from Europe via Shanghai. These are some of the images behind the research, the visual research. And next slide, we can see some of the initial sketches and initial compositions. And in the next slide, we can see the spread. That's it. And that will represent the desk from which Feng Shanho will be fighting the visas for more than 4,000 people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen.
And one thing I find out about the Chinese diplomat is that he won the highest award you can get from Yad Vashem for being a righteous Gentile, the Righteous Among the Nations award, for making that moral choice and risking his life to save thousands of Jewish people.
And we hope that you'll visit the museum when it reopens on July 1st and see for yourself some of the incredible stories that Beth and her team have been able to preserve. We're so super lucky to have found Alice Curry, who I believe is on this call, who is the founder and the publisher from Lantana, and her wonderful team at Lantana and their US distributor, Learner Books. As Beth mentioned, both publishers are committed to bringing diverse voices to children's books. So thank you so much, Alice. Thank you, Lantana. Thank you, Learner. And we are working with Carmen right now on a sequel. So stay tuned. You can order our book on Lantana's publishing site or Amazon or Learner Books. And we hope you'll leave a favorable review.
Okay, so should we open it up to questions? Before we open it up to the audience questions, I wanted to ask Ming and Wah. You know, Ming lives in Hong Kong, Wah lives in Los Angeles. You're in very different time zones most of the time. What is your process? How are you able to write together? How does it work? Can you share that with us?
So as many of you know, Ming and I are very extroverted working professionals and highly pedantic a little bit anxious mothers. So we only have concentrated bursts of creative productivity. So when we're together, we hole ourselves up at the Milburn Public Library in our hometown, great air conditioning. And also, we've been known to take a staycation at the Peninsula Hotel on the Kowloon side of Hong Kong and just divide and conquer for our manuscripts. But this book really was Wah's idea. My only contribution was really finding Carmen, who I used to work with. That's not true, but.
I think you're underselling yourself, Ming. Okay, well, we do have a question from Kathy Christie. What was the most inspirational story to write?
Oh, that's interesting because we wanted to share with you 3 verbs that did not make it to the final book because as Alice, our publisher, wanted more hopeful stories of escape. And the 3 verbs that did not make it were ford, which was the story of all the people in the 1990s and 2000s who forded the Yalu River from North Korea to China. Hide, another John Keane inspired idea that we illustrated but didn't make it to the final book, which was about the Rwandan genocide in 1994. And Thrash, which is about the escape of Pol Pot's regime in the 1970s from Cambodia through the jungle forests of Thailand. But I think when we showed it to our nephews and nieces, their favorite story, my son's favorite story is Fly, which is the story of a Czechoslovakian escape engineer who built his own airplane to fly from Czechoslovakia over the Iron Curtain into Vienna and land his own aircraft. And we have to give a shout out to our nephew, Tyler Chen, who showed us the YouTube video of Ivo, the hero of Fly. So thank you, Tyler.
So I'm curious, one thing that I love about this book is that you made it accessible to a younger audience, and everyone's family has an immigrant story, right? And we know we have friends who have immigrant stories. And, how did you guys decide to, turn this into a children's book? And I'm sure it was a difficult process because some of these stories are difficult to tell. Because, it does, like you said, you couldn't include some of the stories because you wanted it to be more. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, children's books have always been deceptively simple and yet so powerful. Our book is actually probably more for upper elementary and middle school teachers. I see Carter Higgins, the former JTD librarian and a wonderful children's book author and illustrator herself on this. So I think she could also probably knows that with children's books, you can really make a wide impact for not only the kids, but also their parents who are reading it.
Actually Carmen should answer that question because Carmen's job was actually the most important of all, which is how do you tell difficult stories through pictures?
I think because we were working very closely while Ming and Wah were drafting the stories, that was very important to me to feel that human side of the story and feel that really the inspirational part of it and how to depict that into a bit of that adventure that also took, even if a risky one, a very dangerous one, but that part of the story was very important to actually feel it.
And we were all about keeping it simple. I think when Carmen, Ming, and I were looking at how to kind of visually capture some of these more complicated stories, we were really inspired by Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stella and really simplifying things down to the essence of the color. And I think, Carmen, you did an amazing job at capturing that really beautifully and really simply.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of other questions. Sherry Davis would like to know, do you think your book will speak to people about refugees and emigration in a way that can lead to acceptance of and support for policies that help those at our borders?
Well, it's interesting because the last page of the book, which was Alice Curry's suggestion, was to end it on the Human Rights Declaration of the right to movement. And one of the stories in the book is Flea, which is one of the first refugees from climate change from Kirati, an island in the South Pacific to New Zealand. And Jacinda, we love Jacinda, was one of the first to accept a climate refugee. So we hope that showing these different stories, the word refugee is actually a very politicized word, sitting where we are, which is in the United States right now. And when we were looking through these different stories, one of the stories is Disguise, which was Bonnie Prince Charles in the 1700s who escaped, who dressed up as a lady. He was a man, he was escaping Scotland, fleeing religious persecution, I believe. So this, people have been leaving countries for all different kinds of reasons, for all different types of, during different types of traumas. But why does it, Wah, read you the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
So from Article 13, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Article 14, everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution.
Obviously, those were written before the pandemic, but
so that's included in the book.
yes, it's on the last page of the book.
I love that.
And thank you, Alice, for that idea.
Carrie Friedman wants to know, how do you think people today can support today's refugees?
Well, in fact, Carrie and I were together in Brooklyn last week, and she brought me to an amazing coffee shop called Emma's Torch in Brooklyn, which is basically training refugees in culinary skills. So supporting really entrepreneurial businesses like Emma's Torch is amazing, as well as a friend of ours, Sarah Schaefer, is a senior communications person for the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. And Sarah and her team are doing amazing work with the United Nations helping refugees.
And one of the major issues is when refugees or when people get resettled, they need jobs and skills that relate to the jobs that are available. So part of the work is actually upskilling or reskilling people for jobs that they can do. Because most people come for economic reasons as well.
Maybe you guys can share some of those in the chat box, the organization.
I've been Emma's
Torch.
Was it hard to condense these complex stories into such a short
format? Oh, no, it wasn't, because Beth, we have extremely short attention spans, so it was perfect.
I do know that very well.
As I told my friends on West, War and Peace.
How did you come up with the idea of structuring the book around action verbs?
Oh, because Wah had that idea first.
No, we actually grew up loving studying for our SAT, the verbal section of the SAT. So we really love words. And so it was fun to brainstorm these action verbs. Like another verb that didn't make it, that I love this verb, is called hoodwink. And it was basically the story of Tehran and Iran and Argo, the movie Argo captured hoodwink, where
Canadian filmmakers
had to escape Tehran in 1979, 1980.
Okay, what advice do you have for parents who may need ideas about how to process their own feelings at the same time as the things their children may be feeling?
When reading the book?
From Caprice Young.
Oh, that's a great question.
So the question is, what is our advice
for parents who may need ideas for how to process their own feelings that their children may be also, going through at the same time?
Well, I think it's important to see that in each of these stories, even though people had to take great risks and went through incredible danger for a better future, they actually did that. That actually happened. There's like a happy story to each of these episodes.
But I would also personalize it. Like Beth, you were saying, each of us have our own relationship with someone who either faced a very difficult situation and had to leave. And I would think about that. Who is that in your life? And who might that be for your kids? For us, it was our nanny who carried us around as hot water bottles. And it's actually questioning people's background. Like, how did you end up here?
And Caprice, I would also say to your kids who I know are older, but I would just say, stay curious. Ask people about where they're from, where their family's from, where their grandparents from. We didn't all grow up, in
I don't know if you're allowed to
mainstream
ask
America.
people, where are you from?
Well, no, I'm saying be curious about people. Ask questions.
we're told in training not to ask.
You're absolutely right. We should, all be more empathetic as a society and care about where we all came from. And I think it's really important to tell these stories and make sure, these are important stories that need to be told. David Hurst wants to know, does the book include the where they are now pictures presented here?
No, they don't.
But maybe
do where
we'll
they
make
are
a
now.
video of it, David, because actually one of the ones, Sprint, the inspiration for Sprint was actually Meb, who's a marathoner who won the Boston and New York Marathon. And his father, Ruxam, had to leave Eritrea and actually went through Italy to get to the United States and brought his 6 children over, including Meb, who, for those of you who are runners, is a total hero.
Okay, there are a lot of questions coming in. Okay. Ann Chen wants to know, how did you work with Carmen? Do you have a specific image in your mind when you're writing each story?
Carmen, do you want to answer that? Hi, Anne. Maybe Carmen can answer.
Hi. I think at the beginning we had, we talk a lot about it, about how will it feel because of the difficulty actually of the stories. And I think when we all agree about that feeling of each story will be a different world, each story will need to represent a completely different time and situation. And then I started developing this visual language. Then each one, even if feeling the same, each one will need to get its own life, right? That's why some of them are actually like close-ups, like very much close-up, like the one of these guys, and some of them actually depict the entire world, right? Like the one that we saw, Pedal, which goes from basically, it's almost like a world around the world. So I think not having a very clear idea at the beginning, but having an overall intention is good. And then discover through the process.
And again, Carmen had one of the most difficult jobs, because I remember we discussed Cling, which is about the Syrian girls who helped the dinghy that was sinking get to safety. And we debated, remember, Carmen, we debated about the perspective, whether we should be showing the Coast Guard that went by the boat and did not pick up this boat, or whether we should really focus on the drama of the boat. So that was actually a really fun process, an interesting process about what you exclude, because a huge boat went by them and,
ignored their pleas.
yeah.
And we did it mainly via Skype with Carmen, very collaboratively, super lucky.
Well, you're definitely very talented, Carmen, because these are important stories, and it's a very visual book. And so the photographs, the illustrations, are really meaningful in telling these stories. We have a question from Natalie Morales. What lessons do you hope parents and children take away from Escape?
I think that this is something that's super important to Ming and me personally, but is persistence pays. Don't give up, be persistent. And I would also hope what Wah was saying before about depoliticizing the way that people actually arrive in the countries they arrive in. The term illegal aliens or illegal immigration, we don't necessarily need to use that kind of language.
And actually, it was really funny because someone said, "Oh, you could launch your book over Refugee Week," and I was like, "Wait, did we write a book about refugees? Because I thought we wrote a book about different stories of escape." So actually, the beginnings of the book was not at all political. It was more because we love we love historical fiction. So we really were inspired by our own interests as opposed to wanting to really talk about, and that's why Alice's inclusion of the Human Rights Declaration of Movement was actually quite good.
My grandparents emigrated here from Poland. As you know, they were Holocaust survivors. And I remember growing up, my grandparents had thick Polish accents, and my grandmother she was very aware of that and embarrassed by it. And I didn't understand as a small girl, why do you care what other people think? So you have an accent, but she called herself, your grandmother's a refugee. Are you sure you want your friends, to meet me, and I didn't understand. I always felt so bad that she was so, um, paranoid and affected by that. And so I would also say, we all need to make sure that we treat everyone. It doesn't matter where you came from. If you have an accent, it's just, we want to hear your stories. We should embrace, all of our cultural differences, right?
Well, the inspiration for our story, Aping Jed, she could speak no English. She only spoke Cantonese. So she would be feeding us juicy, juicy. And she really could not speak any. I mean, yeah, we had terrible teeth when we were growing up. She fed us orange juice. But
Great. That's great. Okay. Carol Thompson, do you think it's important to show both light and shade in children's books for an authentic story? I think children can deal with difficult subjects if sensitively told. There isn't always a happy ending.
absolutely. Carmen should answer about the lights. Do you want to talk about the lights and darks, Carmen?
Yeah, it's something that we talk quite a bit in the process, right? Like the three of us, because how to depict light and darkness visually, it has like, you can go through so many metaphors, right? Not necessarily with light or like literal lightness or darkness in color, but also like some of the textures. That's why I think like marks are quite important in the book. And once that you go through the book, you can see the titles sometimes behind, they have some marks or some of that are quite relevant, and they give a bit of a feeling without needing to be so literal in some of the depictions. So I think it's a very interesting and challenging task for a visual artist to actually that contrast of light and darkness, and the ways that you can, and kids are so smart, right? So they can sense so many things, not only by literal depictions.
Okay, Mayor Garcetti has a comment. He wants to know, how did you guys get to be so nice and smart? But seriously, he wants to know.
Quite our best friends.
He says it's great to see these two extraordinary authors and friends. Real question, how does someone ever find home when they leave where they are from, and what role does returning, where possible, play in that? It's a really good question.
So it's interesting because I would think that would be the evolution of places like Chinatown or Japantown, which every city has, where people tend towards their own tribes, right? And I think that people bring home with them. We grew up, we very much, I mean, we're sitting here in suburban New Jersey, but our parents live like very Chinese style. So I don't know what you would say.
I don't know, as first generation Americans, I think that you make a home wherever you are. And, our parents were able to combine the best of their native culture and of American culture and sort of raise us in that blended kind of appreciation for both.
But Mayor, what would you say, Mayor Garcetti? You can type it into the chat.
I think it's a really interesting question, and it's something that actually John Keane, my husband, touches on in his documentary film After Auschwitz, which is about 6 women who survived Auschwitz. And they talk about, when you think about home, what is home? What does that mean when you actually had to flee a very difficult situation? In some cases, your lives were in danger, and it, in order to survive, you had to leave your country, your home. So when you get homesick, what do you get homesick for? Even if you do create a home for yourself in a new country and you have children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, it is something that I know many people think about.
I think language plays a big part of it, right? Native languages, having that ability to communicate in your native language, which is why I think I'm a proponent of, where possible, bilingual education.
Yeah. I mean, I remember also when I visited Poland for the first time, the smells were so familiar to me because that's what my grandmother, made in her kitchen. And so I never returned to Poland once she came to America, but yet once I went to that country, everything felt so familiar to me. Okay. Hillary Lifton wants to know, this book would be so great in schools. Is there a teacher's guide?
I think Lantana, maybe Vanessa or Alice, if you could type in the chat. I believe there is a teacher's guide.
And we are also, through Beth, introducing it to Facing History, which is a suggested curriculum from a great organization. Thanks, Hillary, for the question.
Okay, Mark Friedman wants to know, how can we help people overcome the fear of immigrants, an issue that has plagued nearly every society in history?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Because we have wobbly internet.
Oh, okay. How can we help people overcome the fear of immigrants, an issue that has plagued nearly every society in history?
Mhm. I think basic terminology, as I mentioned before, is important. I mean, we use the word illegal immigration. I mean, and the stories of escape have been politicized to blame people. And if we sort of take that, really contextualize why people are leaving en masse and at great personal peril, I think that's one of the first things, is to recognize what really are the causes.
And I think that one of the reasons why children's book reading is so important is that words matter. And I think that words really matter. So, you know, again, depoliticizing immigration and seeing that it happens time over time, country over country. It is not specific or special to the country that you particularly where you're living. It happens all over. I think the oldest story that we have is from Bonnie Prince Charles, who disguised himself.
Rukshan wants to know, without giving too much away, can you give us about your upcoming book?
Oh, okay. Well, it is using the same template of action verbs, and it's a little bit of reimagining how people have pivoted, how people have creatively problem solved and pivoted during big traumas like a wildfire, reforesting, or like running out of land, reclamation, or the underutilization of industrial space. So rejuvenating urban blighted areas.
So it's how people reimagine the world and different solutions. Everybody loves to talk about innovation, but what we want to talk about is how people reimagine things to make them better. And we're working with Suki on it. Thank you, Suki.
Eric's mom.
That sounds great, you guys. I still don't understand how you find time to do this in your very little free time, especially when, for the audience's sake, I know that you're up at before sunrise running in the mountains.
I do have something to say to people about that, because it's not anything special that Ming and I have done this. It's basically, we sublimate our anxiety through creative pursuits and exercise. So, you know, Ming runs like a fiend. She's run more than like 77 marathons. And the way that we can really process 72 marathons, the way that we can process our natural anxiety is by working on something creative as well. It sort of shifts your mentality of focusing.
And I would not call it anxiety, I would call it energy.
Great advice. I love it. Nancy Glassberg wants to know, do you anticipate a book with the words that didn't make it into this first book? Does one word depict the Armenian Holocaust?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Maybe we can do a video or a post about that, but probably not using the thrash and the other words, because we're really focused on reimagine.
Do you envision this book being used in the classroom? I think we talked about that. You're going to talk to organizations like Facing History about creating teachers' guides, which I think is great. And I think it's so important, you know, when we talked about depoliticizing, the term illegal aliens and refugees, we know that education is the greatest catalyst for change. And so starting with, young students is, the best solution.
One of the first people who got the galley of our picture book is a dear friend, Rukshan Mystery Shesby. Wyeth and her daughter Nilofer are best friends from elementary school. And she recommended, when she was reading it with her 7-year-old daughter, Avan, pairing it with an atlas, because it also is a really nice way of the children learning geography. Thank you, Rukshan, for that tip.
So how did you find your stories? Because they were from all over the world.
People like your husband. Yeah, so people recommended them. Suki helped us research as well.
Catherine Sistana gave us Meb's dad's story by forwarding an article that the San Diego newspaper had interviewed him. So really from everywhere.
And I think it's important to know that they're all based on true stories, true personal stories, and they were all personal connections to you or through a friend of yours, right?
And Laura, thank you, Laura. Laura's on this call, but Laura works with Wah and shared her story about leaving Mexico.
And I do want to share with the audience that when you guys first came up with the idea, I remember thinking, wow, this aligns so well with the mission of the museum. I mean, what we do is inspire humanity through truth. And I said from day one, let me know when the book is ready to launch, because we wanted to do something special. So it means so much to me. Here we are right now. We thought we would do this in person, but this is the next best thing, right? So at least we do get to celebrate the worldwide launch, but it's such an important book, and I'm so happy that I got to be there from the very beginning when you first came up with the idea. Do you think you'll be able to go on a live book tour later this year?
Oh, we'd have to ask Alice Curry that, but we're ready. We have our dresses and we're ready for the museum in-person event. We'd love to do book readings.
Hopefully in the fall. The museum's reopening in June, and hopefully in the fall we can do something in person. And I hope that you guys will be able to do your worldwide tour.
Well, we hope the quarantine in Hong Kong is less than 21 days for me. It's a high tax to pay.
Walter Renwick wants to know, he says, hello, and how did you all meet Carmen?
Carmen, do you want to say?
Do you want to say? Ming and myself, when did we meet actually, Ming? We met probably like at least 7 years ago, and we met in London. But then we actually worked together in Hong Kong. And we've been in meetings all around the world, I would say, like Boston, New York, Shanghai. Yeah, we were working together at EF, this great world company, and we had a lot of fun. And after that, I went independent, and Ming called me back one day with this idea, and I was like, yeah, I've never done actually a picture book. I've done a lot of visual tasks myself and like all sort of projects, but sure. And that would be a very mean question.
The message said, Carmen, are you interested in doing a book with us? No pay. On refugees. And she's like, yes.
That would be a very mean approach. And I love that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you guys all connected based on your personalities, and you had good chemistry, which is really important.
And we're actually lucky that Alice picked us as a team together. I think for those of you who are in the children's book world, you know that it's a little bit unusual that the author and the illustrator come as a package deal. And we really did come as a package deal with Carmen, and we did a simultaneous submission, as we always do for all of our books, to many publishers, saying, here is the illustrated dummy of our book. So it was already sort of pre-packaged.
Deborah Kahn is asking, what is the underlying message you want children to take away from reading Escape, given that many of the situations you're writing about were life risking, where people had to defy authority. And, I could start by just saying, at the Holocaust Museum here, we have an entire gallery. It's called Rescue and Resistance, that's devoted just to that. People who defied authority, people who risked their lives knowing that they could be killed for it. So there were people like the Chinese diplomat who were in a position of power where they could go against their own governments to make the right choice and save thousands of lives. And then there were just ordinary people, people who just decided to take in a person and change their identity or raise them. And so,
the subtext, sorry, Beth, the subtext in defy is go with your gut. So in part, it's go with your gut, Debs. And what we said to Natalie Morales's question is like, be persistent. That's one of the things, stay curious, be persistent, and go with your gut. That's what we would want our kid readers to take away.
And I would love, and actually if we were doing a teaching guide, I would say one of the exercises would be write your own story of escape of either someone you know or of yourself. Because I think that when people can imagine people they know and how they had to get there, I think it will help them sort of process the fact that, history is being made when people move.
Susanna Landers, inspiring storytelling. How did you choose what stories to stay in and which ones ended up not including? Was it a difficult choice? I think you guys answered this a little bit earlier.
Some of the stories are really heartbreaking to research. And earlier we had said, the heartbreaking stories of how, 70% of the females leaving North Korea end up in sex trafficking rings. Or the Rwandan genocide, which is incredible stories of horror. And we also mentioned Pol Pot's Cambodian regime of terror as well. That didn't make it in.
I think Alice, our publisher, had a good eye for what would not make good bedtime reading.
And that you don't, and also, a children's book is 32 pages. And so the double page spreads, we could only pick 12 verbs.
I think I read my kids Anne Frank's diary when they were like 6 or 7. But we're not a normal household.
Beth is the one who asked me to run a marathon between Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen.
It was a bike ride. Auschwitz to Krakow next summer in person. My mother wants to know, as someone with a personal story of having to run as an infant with my parents, how did you adopt the story so children would understand the horrors of these experiences? I don't know if you guys know, my mother was actually an infant when my grandparents carried her and had to cross the border in the middle of the night. And every time my mom, made a peep, my grandmother would just breastfeed her to keep her quiet, which is a very fat baby.
It's why she's so intelligent. But I think the pictures play a large part of it, right? Telling the story through pictures. Because if you just read the words, or if they just came from a news article, it wouldn't be as, I think, impactful.
Helen, you can tell us if we were successful at doing that or not.
Oh, Rainey Renwick is with us.
Why isn't she at school?
Rainey wants to know if there's going to be a second book. Shouldn't she know the answer to this question?
Yes, there is going to be a second book, and everything happens in threes. So there's going to be 3 books.
Just like Wah has 3 kids, Wyeth, Rainey, and Kenzie.
Laura Waddington is commenting, the book is wonderful. Congratulations. You mentioned wanting a look that was inspired by Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stella. Was there any specific book or artist that inspired you in the making of this project?
Well, before we hand that over to Carmen, we just want to shout out Laura's work, because she actually has done wonderful films and documentaries about, actually, she lived on the boat of Albanian, I believe Albanian workers who were fleeing.
And Laura Waddington, we met you when we were 14 years old, and she's a very talented self-taught graphic artist who lives partly in Lisbon and partly in London. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
But maybe Carmen can take your question. Laura's father also was one of the first modern art dealers in London, Waddington Galleries. So that's a very appropriate question for your dad.
Anisha Abraham. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carmen.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say that we're looking at tons of reference for books. I think actually getting to do a picture book, design a book, like it doesn't matter what which other task, how much experience a designer have. Like when you get into a book, it's so humbling. It's such a nice challenge to look at the overall. And so we're looking at things like, I think we look a lot at Bruno Munari, right?
Bruno Munari, we love.
Yeah, that was big. And then I personally look a lot at Dutch designers or like Irma Boom, or I don't know, like I love tactile paper. And I was so pleased when we saw the actual thing, the book, because it feels really nice, right? We were all really looking forward to feel the paper, and it's a nice feel, it's a nice weight, it's a nice ratio. So I think it feels good actually to have the thing, not only the stories or the visuals.
But we love one of the reference was Bruno Munari.
Yeah.
Italian.
Well, I think we have time for a couple more questions before we do the closing. So Anisha Abraham wants to know, do you have tips for other authors who are writing a book for children with a powerful message?
Thank you, Dr. Anisha. Thanks, Anisha, for the question. Actually, one of the best things, Susan Patron, who I interned for when she was a librarian in Los Angeles, and then also a Newbery Award winning writer, said, join the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's scbwi.org. And it is an amazing worldwide network of children's book authors and illustrators, editors and publishers. And if you really want to take your children's book writing or illustrating seriously, then join this professional network. That's the number one piece of advice.
And my piece of advice, because Anisha is actually the author of a best-selling book called Raising Global Teens. And when we were writing together, it's just write, sit down and write. Everybody has an idea, but actually getting a book done is meaning you have to write it.
No, you have to finish it. Finish,
right?
Finish.
Amy says, it's so fun to see your bright and beautiful faces. It seems like your stories reflect and encourage some of what I consider your core qualities: vision, courage, ingenuity, curiosity, energy, hope, willingness. What can your fans and friends do to help spread the word and work of Escape? Which is a great question.
Thank you so much, Amy.
I think buy the book and write a review if possible. If you know teachers or librarians that would be interested in stories or teaching about different stories of escape, we'd be very open to talking with them. And again, today's the first launch of it in the United States and Canada. I believe it's out in the UK already.
No, it's coming out in the UK on Wednesday, on May 6th.
May 6th.
So everyone can buy the book online. We'll type it in the chat box. So you can have the links, and Mother's Day is coming up. It's a great Mother's Day gift. Buy it for your friends.
Stretch.
Share the link with
I'd rather have Rukshan's jewelry than.
And I'm just trying quickly to see if I missed anything. But I think we got through.
Thank you, Beth, so much for having us, and for everyone for joining us today and taking some time out to Zoom with us. We really, really appreciate your support, your love, and your readership.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ming Wah, Carmen, for sharing your work and these inspiring stories with us today. As you can see, we probably could have kept going for another hour because everyone is so interested. And we're really excited to see the book and even your next book, and to see you on the New York Times bestselling author list. I'm excited to share with the audience that the museum's reopening on July 1st. If anyone's interested in a private tour, you can contact me at beth@hmla.org. And like I mentioned before, we're really excited about doing an in-person launch of the book. Stay tuned for more information about that. Don't forget to buy the book. And before we sign off, I just wanted to invite everyone to join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. for our monthly program with our community partners, Building Bridges. Tomorrow's panel discussion will focus on the education disparities that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges for children who are getting left behind. And you can also join us on May 11th at 11 a.m. for a conversation about intergenerational trauma in second and third generation Holocaust survivors with clinical psychologist and adjunct professor of psychology at Pepperdine University, Dr. Melissa Wasserman. And you can find out all this information on our website, holocaustmuseumla.org. As you know, the museum brings you programs like today at no charge. So if you're enjoying our programs, we hope you'll consider supporting our work by going to holocaustmuseumla.org to make a donation. And thank you again, Ming Wah and Carmen and Lantana Publishing for joining us today. And we hope to see you again soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.